Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome on this Wednesday afternoon here on the East Coast. I know it may be a little steamy. It's steamy for us here in Columbus, Ohio, so it may be for some of the rest of you as well. My name is Linda Wiley, and I serve as the Director of Online Learning here at Akuhoai, and I'm excited to be with you today and talk about this really important topic, and those are our RAs, or as some of you may refer to them as CAs, or have other titles, but are our students that we work with in that capacity. Before I turn it over to Daniel, I am going to have a couple of announcements. I'm very excited to have you all here today. I know that summer is busy. Sometimes it gives you a little bit of respite, but sometimes summer can be just as busy as other times of the year. So, very excited that you chose to spend some time with us today. All of our webinars are recorded and we put them on our YouTube channel. So, I will be sharing that YouTube channel in the chat as well, so that if you want to go back, if you want to share this with a colleague, or if there are any of our other programs that you may have missed, then I want to make sure that you know that we do put those on our YouTube channel. We have several webinars this summer. The best place to find out about those and register, we put direct links in the Connections newsletter, which comes out every Tuesday early afternoon. For those of us on the East Coast, that would be later morning. For those of you on the West Coast, and at the very bottom in upcoming events, our webinars are highlighted. If you go to our website, which I will also put in the chat, we have our upcoming events on the front page, and you can register right from there. I want to highlight a couple of webinars. We have one actually tomorrow, which is going to be discussing how we prepare our facilities during the summer, the types of activities that go on so that we can be ready for our fall students to come back to campus. On July the 14th, we have a program on the topic of onboarding with some of our colleagues from the University of Illinois. So that will be a great topic and hopefully very good timing for you and your colleagues as you get ready to welcome new members of your team onto your staff. For those of you that would like to join us in Orlando in just a few days, from June the 21st through the 24th, it is not too late to register for Campus Home Live. Maybe you have a little bit of money that you need to spend before the end of June. If that's the case, we would love to see you in Orlando for our largest in-person event of the year. We also have online courses that are available if you need to spend a little bit of money. And then we always have really good resources in our bookstore. If, again, you want to work on your professional development this summer and you may have the opportunity to spend some of those last dollars yet here in the fiscal year. So enough of me yammering on. I'm excited to introduce Dan to you all. And Dan's going to tell a little bit more about himself and share a little bit more about his experience. But Daniel Pretz serves as the Associate Director for Housing and Resident Life at the Peabody Institute of the Johns Hopkins University. And again, I'm going to let him share more about himself and his experience as we talk about a caring approach to RA development. So take it away, Dan.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Linda. Just get this set up. Okay, is everyone seeing a PowerPoint?
We are.
Okay. Yes.
Give me 1 second. Let me just shuffle some windows around and we will get going. Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming today. As Linda shared, my name is Daniel Pretz, and I'm pleased to be joining you today from downtown Baltimore, where I serve as the Associate Director for Housing and Residence Life at the Peabody Conservatory, which is a music and dance conservatory affiliated with Johns Hopkins University. In my role, I oversee the on-campus Housing and Residence Life program for a community of roughly 300 artists, and I supervise a team of 2 graduate hall directors and 8 to 10 resident assistants. I've worked in housing residence life professionally for 16 years, the last 10 of which have been at Peabody. I don't know at what point someone is considered to be a lifer in this field, but I think I must be getting at least approaching that point. Oddly enough, when I was an RA, I was actually given a paper plate award that said I was the most likely to spend my life in residence life. And that paper plate has proven to be prophetic. I do feel as though I've spent my life in residence life. In some ways, this spending has been an investment in myself and others, and in the world that I want to see. And in other ways, this spending has been more of a taxing. Every transaction has been an exchange, though, and I do feel as though I've learned a lot through my time in this field. In truth, residence life work has shaped much of my life. And after 16 years in this field, I've come to consider that there is no such thing as residence life work. There is only life and the work that we choose to engage in. This presentation discusses a care-based approach to RA development. And at the center of that approach is a fairly simple claim. I believe that RAs are engaged in deep and meaningful work, and that it's important for our supervision to meet them there. I view supervision as a type of hidden curriculum through which RAs learn what leadership looks like in practice. And if we want our RAs to be reflective and caring, values-driven leaders, then we must model the same in our supervision of them. We learn about leadership from the examples we encounter of it. This is true of all of us. I remember when I started out in this field, I was performing the role as best as I could and looking primarily outward for signs of what I should be doing and how I should be performing. I wanted to do a good job, I wanted to be seen as competent, and I wanted to prove that I belonged. And our RAs are no different. Now, after all these years, you would be right to assume that I've seen a lot. And I've worked through many situations and supported RAs as they've encountered the reality of this work, and as their residents encountered the reality of life. My supervisory style has continued to evolve over the years, as has my understanding of this work. And a key moment for me was when I realized that nobody really knows what they're doing in this field. Nobody has all the answers, or knows how everything works, or is fully prepared for all of the situations that they might encounter. We are all figuring this out as we go. So today I'd like to share with this group some of what I've learned along the way. I'm not providing answers so much, but reframing some questions to enable us to grapple with them. I'm going to begin by sharing a reflection on my own experience in the field as a way of making the case for care. And I'll then go over some principles of care that can be applied to our work and conclude with some practical examples. I've come to believe that true leadership emerges out of conditions of uncertainty. Situations where we don't know up from down and where there isn't a script provided. Those cases where there are only the people in front of us, the situation that we're inside of, and the values that we've practiced enough to be able to rely on when the plans no longer hold. I've learned this lesson through a variety of experiences over the years, but I want to examine 2 of them in particular today. The first is my experience managing a housing and residence life program during COVID, and the second is the tragic death of an RA. These are very different stories, but for me, they sit together because each one taught me something different about care. COVID showed me what it looks like when care appears almost entirely as control and compliance. And grieving the loss of an RA showed me what care looks like when control is no longer possible. And between those 2 experiences, I came to understand care to be a leadership practice that allows us to connect with others deeply and to support them in meaningful ways while remaining fully human in this institutional work. COVID was a difficult experience for all of us, and it was difficult for me. Setting aside, though, all of the practical and material matters that had to be confronted in the pandemic, I was deeply impacted by a forced philosophical reorientation of my work. During COVID, control and compliance became synonymous with care. The unprecedented circumstances required that I fully inhabit the power of my position and maintain control to ensure compliance as a matter of life safety. There was a deadly virus sweeping the globe and nobody knew what to do about it. All we could do was figure it out as best we could. The work was exhausting, but beyond this, my duties were shaped around students as bodies and as objects capable of spreading sickness. Everything became centered on risk, exposure, isolation, and enforcing the ever-evolving public health protocol. There was no space for connection and for relationships to form in the way that I understood them. I was forced to operate from a type of dualism. A student was either compliant with the public health protocol or they were not. And if they were not, they were removed from campus, period. The protocol that we were enforcing often felt draconian, even though it was designed for the sake of care. Although the community didn't feel that care. My motives were questioned, my values were challenged. I received angry emails from students and parents accusing me of not caring. The problem was, it wasn't that I didn't care. I did. But that care was not being felt because it appeared entirely as controlling people's behaviors and enforcing rules to protect their safety. COVID showed me what it looks like when care is framed as control. It showed me what that environment does to students and what it does to us. We didn't assess learning outcomes during COVID. Instead, we tested the wastewater output of the residence halls to check for viral shedding, and I did not feel like an educator anymore. In my annual review that year, I listed reconnecting with joy as one of my goals for the following year, and I articulated a promise that I would never again do work that could not be done healthily. I see those statements now as evidence of just how bad it was. Coming out of COVID, as the public health guidelines were slowly rolled back and the new normal descended, I was committed to reconnecting with the relational and person-centered parts of my job. And I got my wish, only not in the way that I'd been hoping for. Peabody doesn't offer housing over the summer, so I'm not accustomed to receiving late-night phone calls during times when the residence halls are closed. So, when I received a text message from my supervisor late one Saturday night in June, asking that I call her, my stomach tightened a little. I called her and asked what was up, and she just said it. One of my RAs had passed away, and she didn't have any more details than that. But we didn't need any more details than that, because we both understood what this meant. While the news stunned me, it did not overwhelm me, at least not at first. It hit me much like the other major situations and emergencies that I've worked with throughout my career. It felt like a work crisis. My supervisor asked if I had someone to talk to or if I wanted to discuss anything, and I assured her that I would be fine. I've always been proud of my ability to maintain a clear head during a crisis. We discussed the next steps, planning for Monday, discussing who needed to receive a personal outreach before any broader messaging went out, and building out a support plan for those who were affected. And it felt good to be focusing on things like plans and next steps and moving forward. As we spoke, I came to realize that my supervisor was tending to me in the same way that I might tend to a student of concern. Only I couldn't understand why, because I told her that I was fine. And truly, I felt like I was fine. Only as our call began wrapping up, I felt an anxiety growing inside of me. I asked her a simple question that I already knew the answer to, and a big question that nobody knows the answer to. And I felt truly supported as she told me exactly what I needed to hear, because she always knew the right thing to say. As it turned out, I really wasn't that fine after all. And later that evening, I ended up on the phone with an on-call counselor through my job's employee assistance program. I was so sad, and for so many reasons. I felt like I was standing at the epicenter of an earthquake that was racing outward and bearing down on people that I cared about. And there was nothing that I could do to stop it or to even warn them. There was nothing to hold on to and no option but to ride it out and see what comes. In the days and weeks that followed, I engaged with work in ways that I'd never had before. I carried my grief openly, not that I really had a choice in the matter. I drafted messaging while staring in disbelief at the words that I was writing and watching as the reality of the situation came alive through my fingertips. And for the first time in my life, I was responsible for personally informing someone about the tragic death of their friend. I remember telling my supervisor and a crisis counselor that I was working with that I was worried I wouldn't be able to make it through that conversation without crying. And they assured me that if that happened, it would just serve to humanize me and would honestly probably help. I'll never forget that conversation or how out of place and out of my depth I felt to be heading into it. I had worked out what I was going to say. I was just going to say it. But I had no idea what was going to happen next or how to prepare for it. That was when I learned that true leadership begins when the script ends and when we have nothing but our values to guide us. I think that because I was grieving and because I felt out of my depth, I was able to show up well in that moment and provide a degree of actual support and comfort. Being out of my depth forced me to give up any hope of control, and my grief forced me to embrace a posture of vulnerability, offering up a real, whole human that my student could connect with through actual compassion. The Latin root of compassion being to suffer with. At one point in the conversation, the person remarked that I always knew the right thing to say. And I could see the care which my supervisor had given to me rippling outward through my own practice. And this is what I mean when I say that supervision is the hidden curriculum of leadership. My supervisor didn't teach me anything. She facilitated my learning by modeling care. And as I've moved on to learn more about the secondary effects of trauma, I've come to better understand the formative ways that this work has affected and shaped me over the years. And I've questioned what it's doing to our RAs. In Crisis, Compassion, and Resiliency in Student Affairs, Kevin Jackson writes that traumatic situations happen to us, through us, and because of us. While my RAs did not engage with these situations in the same way that I did, they engaged with them all the same, and they were impacted by them. And I think it's important that we recognize that RAs are engaged in deeply meaningful work all the time. They are constantly encountering situations that force them to negotiate the distinction between control and care. And they are constantly encountering questions about relationships, life, identity, belonging, and what it all means. And we need to respect this as supervisors and as educators. RAs are always learning something. They are going to they're going to learn how to embody their roles and carry their work through the example that we set. And this is one of the reasons why I think it's so important that we center our work on care. So I had a question. I realize doing a webinar, a discussion question might be a little tricky, but I wanted to open this up to some folks. So I shared two examples of situations which I would describe as big situations. And at the same time, I'm asserting that RAs encounter these kind of miniature crises of meanings every day. And so I'm curious to hear from you. What situations might appear to an RA as being a crisis of meaning? And for this, feel free to come off mute and chime in. Feel free to put something in the chat and I can read it out loud. And if you want to stay private, you can also just send it to me directly and I'll read it out loud.
So Daniel, I don't know if you can see the chat, but there's a comment, a suicide attempt
Yep.
could be one of those, and or a suicide that one of our attendees put in the chat as well that occurred.
Yeah, any of these matter, anything in it, yes. Yeah. Yeah, those will certainly appear as crises of meaning. Supporting a student through a mental health crisis. Yes. Sexual assault. Any of these situations where domestic violence, traumas that students are experiencing, comments about suicide as well as natural deaths. So I think I agree that all of these are good examples of times when an RA would experience a crisis of meaning. Thank you. The loss of a family pet. I really appreciate that. And what I appreciate about that, the idea of the loss of a pet being a crisis of meaning, is like pet loss is one of those things where it hits you deeply and it's almost like you're ashamed of how much it hurts because you're like, it was just my pet, you know, it wasn't like a person or something. And what I appreciate about this is that, you know, it kind of it frames the matter that what a crisis is, it's up to the person naming it to decide what is and isn't a big deal. And with our RAs, you know, I constantly remind myself that I've been doing this work for a long time. I've been a housing director or I've been working in housing residence life for years. I've said that. And, you know, after a while, crisis starts to mean something different to me than it would be to someone else. Honestly, when I think about a crisis of meaning that an RA encounters, maybe crisis is a bit strong of a term, but I think about their first floor meeting as an RA, that time when they have to stand up in front of people for the very first time with no adults behind them and be responsible for moving that conversation forward. They're not necessarily exposed to stark, you know, dangers or dealing with life safety matters at that point, but their reputation is on the line. They have social skin in the game. And that's going to sit with them. Anything, yeah, that'll sit with them, particularly if it's something where they feel like they are like their identity is being put on display. See comments about natural disasters near campus, navigating academic concerns and issues. I appreciate that. Financial issues. What does an RA say to someone who's choosing between food and tuition? Navigating the line between a friend and an authority figure and what that means for their personal friendships. That's a good one. What does it mean? What does this mean? Exactly the question of meaning. Okay. So I have two quotes I'd like to share with you. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to share these quotes. As we think about this idea of care-based leadership and the educational priority of our work, I don't know, I'd like you to sit with these and then maybe offer any reactions. The first is from the American philosopher John Dewey. He says, education is not preparation for life. Education is life itself. And the second is from the author Maya Angelou, who says, people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. What does this suggest when it comes to the idea of education and care-based supervision and leadership? I'll say this idea of education not being preparation for life, but being life itself. I think that might be at the very heart of this presentation and my approach to work. You know, I was driving one time with one of my GAs. So I wasn't driving, she was driving, but I was going somewhere in a car, she was driving. And we were talking about the idea that, you know, if I was to be out in a car with some 23-year-old person driving, I might not think anything of it, but make it a 23-year-old student. Like if a student's driving, well, oh my gosh, am I safe? What does that mean if a student is driving? And we were talking about this and talking about this idea that, you know, when we frame things, when we talk about students, it's almost like we create this othering of them, where we talk about like student leadership as being kind of a junior version of leadership, and the experience of a student as being something, I don't know, something apart from life. And what I like about this is it just brings me back to that centeredness of this is real life. These are real questions of meaning. The feelings that they have or feel are real. Then when their hearts get broken, they're actually broken. It's real love and betrayal and all of these things that they're grappling with. And I don't know, it makes our work feel a little, it adds some depth, I think, to our work and some import that really enriches it. Okay. Lost my mouse. One second. Okay, so what does care look like in practice, though? I've broken this next part down into kind of these four pillars of care to help frame its different dimensions. And I want to be upfront. These are just words that I made up for this presentation. And so I'm using them to help communicate this concept, but I'll admit that there may be better options out there. So next, I'm going to go through each of these pillars briefly, just to explain what I mean by care. And then we'll move on into discussing how care can appear within some various types of supervisory functions. So first is this idea of presence. And by presence, I'm talking about more than just a physical presence. It's an emotional presence and availability. Keeping yourself available and free enough that you can actually focus your attention on the feelings and experiences of the person in front of you. It requires bringing your full self into the work, including the part of you that knows what it feels like to feel insecure, inadequate, uncertain, or like an imposter. This matters because RAs often experience their roles from that place of uncertainty. And they're trying to lead while still wondering whether they're doing it right. And they're embodying these roles while still learning what they mean. They're trying to appear confident while feeling unsure, and they are trying to support residents while learning how to support themselves. When we are emotionally present for that, we can connect with them more deeply and empathize with what they're feeling, asking not only about what's happening, but what these moments mean to them. When we're present to and for someone, we offer them a whole, complete human to connect with, and we bring the richness of our full lived experience to that matter at hand. Very much life advice. I like to think of being present as offering myself to someone as an empty vessel into which they can pour their concerns. Being present requires that we quiet our minds in order to be present. We can't give our attention when we're scattered into other areas or when we're more focused on solving problems than on connecting. You know, something about this work is everyone comes to me thinking that I have these magic answers to solve their problems, but there are plenty of problems that have no solutions. But even in those cases where students are stuck in the muck and have no way out, through our presence, we can choose to come sit next to them and to look at the world from their perspective and hear the story that they're telling themselves. It's about being with someone. When I talk about perspective, this reminds us to consider the angle from which we're viewing any situation. We're going to see things very differently than our RAs do, and negotiating those different perspectives can help us to see these people more fully. This asks us to see the world through their eyes while acknowledging their limitations and gifts, and their fears and their hopes. RAs are exposed to risks that professional staff are not. They have social skin in the game. They're managing their image from a peer level and worrying about things like whether they're liked, trusted, and accepted by their community. And they're also engaging with this work for the first time. Nearly every experience is a first, and their definition of crisis is going to be different than ours. It's important that we stay attuned to this because if an RA experiences something as a crisis from their perspective, but I don't recognize it as one from mine, I may miss that they're in a position where they need some support. Gaining perspective requires a posture of curiosity. We have to wonder about our RA's experiences and ask questions that allow us to understand them more fully. I talk about patience just as a reminder that this work is slow. Relationships take time to build, and we're not going to create supportive, trusting, and caring relationships with people in a single meeting. Those relationships are built through consistency over time. We have to be patient because learning also happens over time. Anything that we say to a student or model for them or show them will need to be reflected on before they can fully absorb it. Every student is on a journey, and we're not able to usher them along it from the beginning to the end. All we can do is meet them at certain points along the way, listen to their story, and help them find their next step. Most of the real work happens, though, outside of our meetings and training sessions. Growth and learning happen later, when the RA is alone in their bedroom reflecting on what was said, or when they're walking back from a conversation and replaying it in their mind. And it happens weeks, months, and even years later, when something we said finally connects to something that they're experiencing. We have to resist the urge to force learning to happen on our timeline and allow students to grow organically. I know for myself, when issues arise, I get ahead of myself by wanting to immediately jump in and address the matter and solve all the problems. I want to teach people the whole lesson up front and just explain to them how life works so that they can understand everything right now. But that's not the way this works. And when I start feeling the need to give a student a lengthy lesson, I try to remind myself to give them a seed instead, and to say the thing in a way that they can actually carry. Plant a seed and then check in later to see how it's growing. It is patient work. When I talk about processing, this reminds us that we can't control a student's behavior or their feelings, but we can help shape the filter through which they process their experiences. Learning happens in reflection. When we're able to guide how someone reflects on their experiences, we can help direct their learning and growth. But this requires trust. RAs have to trust us enough to share the story that they're telling themselves about their experience, to tell us the story that they're telling themselves about their experiences, and to name what they're afraid of and what they're ashamed of or what they don't understand. When I'm helping an RA process things like mistakes, poor choices, or difficult situations, I often find that my role is to help them reframe negative narratives that they're telling themselves. Mistakes and poor choices can quickly turn into stories of incompetence and failure that serve to validate imposter syndrome and support story narratives of inadequacy. In helping RAs to process their experiences through a lens of care, we can interpret those stories and create a space for them to talk through what happened honestly and explain what they felt, what they assumed, and what they learned. We're also able to influence the meaning that they take from that experience and help them learn how to confront that question, how can I do better, with confidence rather than shame. Processing also calls on us to reflect on our own experiences through a lens of care. We can't guide RAs through reflection if we're unfamiliar with the practice. I'm better able to help my RAs confront the question, how can I do better, confidently, because I confront that question regularly myself, and not only when things are going wrong. Processing matters through a lens of, processing matters through a lens of care, empowers experiential learning and a growth mindset. Okay. So we've talked about this kind of framing of care. We've made the case for care. Oh, shoot. There we go. What I'd like to do now is break this down into some more detailed kind of what does this look like in the functions that we're performing. So I have a few thoughts to share about these, but while I'm talking, I'd also really like for you to think about your practices in these regards and think through in what ways are we supporting narratives of control and compliance versus care? What does it look like to, in what ways are we taking opportunities to grapple with questions of meaning? And I'll be asking folks to share out afterwards. So when it comes to selection, I think that that's really where supervision begins. Selection isn't only about choosing people for roles, but it's also about introducing them to those roles and starting their training. We need to, I like to think carefully about what is going into like the flyers, the communications, and the marketing that we put out about our positions. And I ask, what does this say? And what does this teach people about who we are and what we value? Excuse me 1 second. Scrolled too far. Yeah. In our applications, we include things like an essay question where candidates are asked to reflect on an ethical dilemma. This allows us to see more of how they think and process situations and what sort of values are guiding their practice. For interviews, we send out the questions in advance to help ease some of that anxiety that we know candidates are experiencing. And this also allows us to include some reflection questions that require more thought. I ask them to think about what a resident most needs from an RA. And I ask them to respond to that same John Dewey quote that I shared earlier about education being life itself. I'm not particularly interested in how well someone performs under artificial social pressure. I'd rather understand how they reflect and how they prepare and how they choose and what they choose to reveal about themselves given the opportunity to be thoughtful. When we ask candidates to reflect, we invite them to display their values, not just their accomplishments. This gives us a better way to assess someone's potential to grow in the role, but also lays a groundwork for the type of supervision that they can expect to receive within it. RA training is one of the clearest places where a philosophy of care becomes visible, both through the content that we teach and in how we teach it, how we structure the days and facilitate that learning. I worked for an institution one time. Every RA training session began with the RAs being asked to put all their cell phones on the table in the back of the room so they wouldn't have access to them during the session. And I absolutely understand that approach and the need for it. But I also ask and question, what are RAs learning from this? And what are we teaching them about leadership? What does this behavior teach them? It can teach a culture of control, which says, here are the rules, but also here are the consequences. And here's why you better not mess up. However, in training, we can also instead teach a culture of care, which shows the values that guide our work and the responsibilities that we have within it. In my RA training, I center my work on the values that guide us. And we discuss how those values appear within the different functions that RAs are asked to perform. While we do talk about how to do the job, we also spend a lot of time talking about why this work is important and what sort of impact it makes. And in this way, I'm teaching them what it is they should be caring about. In one-on-one supervisions, working for a music and dance conservatory, I like to approach these almost like applied music lessons. I view them as being opportunities for RAs to have some time on my calendar to talk through their experiences in the role, what they've been putting out there, and to get feedback and support from me. I don't see them as being primarily opportunities to talk about, for me to talk about their performance. Indeed, a rule of thumb I use for our one-on-one meetings is I want to make sure that the RA is talking for 80% of the time, and I'm limiting myself to just 20%. It's a good way for me to keep things centered where I feel like they should be. Staff meetings, I provide structure and consistency through the staff meetings. I refer to it as being RA church, in that we create a pattern and we follow that same pattern and those same pulses throughout the year and give them something stable and consistent that they can expect. We start every meeting with a check-in that invites folks to share where they're at or what's on their mind. This helps us to build team dynamics by having folks name the thing that's on their mind, but it also gives them an opportunity to take that thing and park it somewhere and be present in the meeting. When I'm working with issues of accountability, I frame them from a growth mindset, assuming that RAs want to do a good job and are worried that they're not doing a good job, and that my job is to help them get to there. In situations where RAs don't particularly care about the work that they're doing, I listen to them with an open mind to see they care about something. What is it? Are they misunderstanding something about the nature of this work? Or maybe they're engaged in work that they don't feel is meaningful. And finally, with incident management and managing incidents, I think it's important to follow up with RAs really after any time that they have to perform as an RA, not just those major situations, but anytime they're called upon to be a leader. Just to ask them, how did that experience feel? What do you think went well? What do you wish you could do over? Even just in asking these questions, what I'm doing is I'm telling them things and telling them that when you manage situations, sometimes there's things you wish you could do over. And I'm giving them space to kind of process all of that. So with that said, I'm curious to hear from y'all. When you think about your practice, what are the ways in which care appears in these different areas? Let me see if I can find the chat window again.
And again, feel free to put these in the chat or come off mute if you would like to share.
All right.
Dan, I'll add one if that's okay. As people, I think are maybe furiously typing. I think that remembering the details and bringing them up again, like if an RA is stressed about a test, remembering that specifically and then asking about it later shows that you really that you were doing that active listening and that you're continuing to bring their details back into the conversation.
Yeah. It's really nice to know that people are thinking about you even when you're not
Hmm.
around,
Hmm.
and thinking about the things that matter to you.
Hmm.
Got some comments appearing in the chat saying, during my very first one-on-one, of the year, I'll make it very clear that I take their mental health very seriously. When it comes to accountability, I always do a check-in first to see how they're doing, recognizing that they're students first and then RAs, being flexible as needed to support them holistically. I really appreciate that flexibility. Something I think about is I see lots of like, I don't know, like when it comes to due dates and deadlines, like I think it's important that we provide structure for RAs, but I think it's also important that that structure be provided to help them do the job well. We know that they're going to get busy and overwhelmed, and so we provide an outline for how this work should be done. But also, in many ways, these deadlines were arbitrarily picked by me. I just picked that date rather than that date so we could have a date. And so if we're in a spot where an RA is struggling with something, it's such an easy thing to do to realign, like, what are the things that matter? After any traumatic incident, it's important to meet with the team of RAs to ensure that they're okay. Yes. Debriefing after an incident. Like this person says, I like to do vibe checks during staff meetings to get a pulse on how they're feeling and what's happening in the corners of their community. You have trouble getting your team to engage in this, though. Something that one of my GAs a couple of years ago had this. It's just such a good idea. What she'd done was she went through and just made these cards. She printed off a bunch of pictures on cardstock that she just found online, just random images. Like here's a dog chasing a bubble. Here's a mirror that fell on the ground. Here's something that whatever. And we would start off every meeting. She'd just chuck this pile of photos into the middle of the table and ask people to pick the one that reflects where they're at. And so to that piece of a lack of engagement, I think also, building out a route for them to engage. The nice thing about that is it prompts some reflection and also just gives them a way to kind of safely talk about stuff. In other meetings, we've been in another case where we do things like the rosebud thorn as our kind of check-in, and that never goes quite as smoothly as the ambiguous cards that they could take with any way they wanted. Encouraging vulnerability by showcasing it. Yes, I agree with that. Sharing with my RAs that I'm also human and that I get overwhelmed creates some connection and helps break down barriers. Fostering an environment of care. Absolutely, John. I agree with that entirely. And I think that the other thing about that, going back to this idea of educating, telling someone about vulnerability or telling them about the importance of vulnerability is really different than displaying it in a way. Taking interests in your RA's interests outside of the job and showing up when you can. It shows the RAs that you care outside of just a supervisor role and creates an environment where they can trust you to open up when they're feeling those crisis moments. Yes. Yeah. When people feel supported that you remembered they had a test, like imagine what they feel like when it's like, wait, you came back from home to go to that thing that I was involved in or to see me in that play or whatever the activity is. Okay. Oh, right. Thank you all for that. Oh, I saw more pop up. Checking in with them during exams, asking what's making them anxious, and is there a good way to help like that? And honestly, if you can predict what a good way to help is, that's even better. Showing some of that empathy of what would you like if you were stressed out about an exam? What would make you feel cared about and supported for? Playing games. What do you meme during the photo activity areas? Oh yeah, talking about someone sharing other examples of vibe checks, playing the what do you meme game and doing a similar type of photo activity. Okay, thank you all for that. Lots of good care being given. So I often see young res life professionals taking to Facebook to express frustrations and disappointment with their RAs, their bosses, their institutions, and with this work in general. And for the most part, I understand and appreciate this sentiment. It feels as though something is disappearing from this field. and like we've lost something along the way. Now, I know this because I've felt that loss, and I've experienced that hollow hopelessness. Kevin Jackson and Katie Treadwell write that student affairs practitioners carry a deep hurt and a magnificent hope, the hope that we can make things better. And this is honestly the main reason I've been working to cultivate a care-based approach to this work. We care for ourselves when we care for others. And when I teach RAs to care about this, this magical and miraculous work that we get to be a part of, I end up teaching myself the same lesson by telling myself that same story. And I become better for it. One way that this appears in my work is through the work of the Residence Life Sparkle Fairies, a special troop of fairies who live in the walls of the residence halls and who expertly evade the exterminators and housekeeping so they can keep a watch over the RAs. Sometimes when the training days are getting long or the semester is getting difficult, they'll pop out and leave little treats or notes of encouragement for the RAs to find. Little reminders that they're part of something bigger than themselves and that the work that they're doing matters. And when I write these messages on behalf of the Sparkle Fairies, my trick is to pick one RA and write the message to them directly, but to then deliver it to them all. Doing this allows me to regularly engage with, reflect on, and expand the warmth and affection that I bring to this work. So I'd like to close out by sharing something with anyone who is experiencing disillusionment or dissatisfaction with a field that is failing to live up to what you know it can and should be. It's a message from the Sparkle Fairies and a call to care that my RAs found pinned to their bedroom doors a couple of years ago after closing the residence halls for winter break. And it's called The Night After Closing. I'll read this for you. 'Twas the night after closing, when deep in the halls, an RA was shaken awake by a call. The duty phone lay nestled, powered off and plugged in, for this was a call that awakened from within. The floor was all but vacant now. The residents were all gone. The common space was empty, but the stories still lived on. Those of meetings and beginnings, and of memories in the making, and of bonds forged in togetherness, which would not soon be breaking. The RA sat reflecting this, while a smile lit up their face. They thought about the impact that they'd had within this space, their vision of community, and the dreams for which they labored, and the mission and the values to which their RA work was catered. Suddenly, springing from the warmth of these notions, the RA bore witness to a luminous commotion. For there, in the still, stoic silence of night, a spark had emerged that was teeming with life. The Residence Life Sparkle Fairies were pulled into being by the care and devotion found in this RA's dreaming. They flittered and glittered and perched on the bed. We've brought you a message, the fairy queen said. You've led with compassion, with care, and with grace. You've made a real difference in this special space. You've comforted, encouraged, advised, and inspired, and surely by now you're deservedly tired. We're so very proud of you and all you've accomplished, and the good that you've wrought, we would also acknowledge. You turned fear into hope and helped residents find confidence. You supported their progression, and you taught them how to dance. Your work doesn't end now, but it shifts in imperative. As a leader, this break is time to read your own narrative. See the courage, the empathy, and the heart that you've shown. See the things you've developed and the ways that you've grown. We've watched from a distance as you've learned to become, and the whole of your parts is worth more than their sum. The truth, though invisible, is evident to see. You are not the same person who began this journey. With that, the troop vanished, but the spark stayed behind, softly illuminating the room while inspiring the mind. The RA then looked down and saw and began to understand that the light from this spark was shining out of their very own hands. If there's anything that you take away from this presentation, I hope it's an understanding that you are the best thing that you bring into your role. Never forget how remarkable you are, or how much good radiates into the world when you shine. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. I don't know about the rest of you, but I kind of needed that feel good right about now as some things of around us are very heavy. So thank you so much. If you've got any feedback, comments, questions, definitely put those in the chat. But I think this was a great way, Daniel, for us to really think about our relationships ourselves internally, but also how really that manifests with our relationships, particularly with this very special group of students that we have the privilege of working with. So thank you again so much. Again, put any last minute thoughts in the chat. As a reminder, this will go on our YouTube site. You all will get a direct link to the recording. Please feel free to share far and wide. If you go to our YouTube site, we have folders for 2026 webinars, 2025 webinars. So that's our most recent content that if you need a break over lunch or have some downtime, please feel free to enjoy that great content generated through our webinars. And we hope to see you at another one again soon. Thanks, everyone.